I'm Sally O'Brien. Hi. I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version of how the recasting of building assets process came about and why it came about. It started with the stats that were keeping the building fund up at night and making our stomach hurt. 4 churches a month closing, 50 a year, and probably becoming more. And knowing that there were so many parishes that couldn't afford both clergy and program and building, and were keeping their building because it was frankly the hardest thing to get rid of. So that's how they were making that choice. And it felt really, really crummy to believe that the Episcopal Church was becoming so inconsequential in people's lives. And while we're not quite as quirky as the Shakers, we were kind of going down the same road. And we thought, you know what, we are just too smart for this. We are not going to be overcome by the cultural shifts. We're going to work with them, and we're going to have a future and start a new thing. And we knew we had to take it seriously because the cultural shifts affected the building fund. Small churches can't afford to do their deferred maintenance projects, so they don't take out loans, and there weren't very many new projects being built. And the board looked around and said, not very many loans. We better make sure that what we're doing is relevant to what the church needs today. We better see what our future is going to look like. They didn't ask themselves, gee, how can we make more churches want more loans? Or how can we make them build more buildings? What they said to themselves was, how are we relevant? We've got to go find out what the churches need and get public about it and be clear that we don't know what our future is going to look like. And part of this, the process that we went through, is exactly what happens in the recasting of assets. It's the going through that period of not knowing what the future is going to be for a while. They also were very, very clear that they were more interested in the future of the Episcopal Church than they were of the building fund, and more interested in the church than the Episcopal Church. It was really clear that we were having some big questions, not just how do we survive, but the larger picture. The next one. We made some strategic decisions. We decided that if we wanted to expand, we couldn't do it in the New York metro area. It was just too expensive, so we moved. And we moved to a place where we could expand when we were ready. And we went around and we started asking people, so why don't you want our loans? And what we learned was we're offering the wrong product. There were still building projects, but they were really expensive now. And so we needed to offer bigger loans with longer terms, and that's exactly what we did. We changed our product. We also had a key learning during this phase that you just can't keep adding to your plate unless you have all the money and staff in the world to fund and staff everything. You're going to have to make choices of letting go. And so we had to let go of some work that was really important to us and really fabulous, but it wasn't going to be part of our future. We had to figure out what our niche was and focus very strategically on funding that and staffing that. So we let go of things, and certainly we retired the stuff that was no longer cutting edge. So the printed newsletter and that kind of thing, toast. We made sure that the web line item was heavily funded and will be permanently funded so that it's constantly be reinvented. It's not a one and done thing to have your website, and we took the responsibility for making sure that it was an active marketing tool and a news line. So we're creating material for it all the time. It's no longer passive. And then we went really public and we started asking people, we're not really quite sure what our future needs to be, what do you think? We asked diocesan staff what they needed, and they said, you know what, we really need to get together with some other diocesan staff and find out what they're doing with these congregations that have buildings and they can't afford them. And so the board said, well, you know what, let's provide that opportunity, and that's exactly how Buildings for a New Tomorrow came about. The board said, test it out, invite people, see whether or not they want to come, and that worked. We asked the church pension group what dilemmas they were noodling on about church buildings, and we learned that churches have the largest carbon footprint in the US because our buildings are used so little. And we went online and we started looking at church calendars of parishes, at hundreds of parish calendars, to see what are churches doing every week and what activities are scheduled. And what we found out was, while there are some that are incredibly active in multi projects for the parish outside of the parish, there were a slew that have really very little going on except Sunday services. The next one. So we didn't focus on what we can't control. What we focused on is what we can do. And the good news was the problem that congregations have these buildings that are empty became the solution. And it's so nice when it works out that way, that your problem actually becomes the opportunity. When you have empty buildings, you have an opportunity to fill them and do things with them. And yippee skippy, we own the buildings. That asset is huge and it's ours. And so it was clear that we have already what we need to start new futures. So our focus shifted from how to build new churches to how to help congregations afford and use the buildings that they have. We still do issue loans and we still help parishes do their building projects, but the greatest need right now was financial sustainability and a thriving church. And so we hunkered down and we crafted the skeleton of the recasting of building assets process, and we created a pilot. So for the pilot project, we joined forces with the Episcopal Church Foundation and a really gutsy bishop, Sean Rowe of Northwestern Pennsylvania, to use our buildings as a real estate asset to support the parish budget rather than just be a drain on it. And our board was really, really clear. They said, perfect is the enemy of good. Do not worry about this being perfect when you launch the pilot. Get out there and do something. Start something new. Test it out. They know it might fail. That was okay. Whatever failed, we would analyze it and use it as fodder for the next iteration, because we knew that, frankly, we would be updating this process forever. It's not a cookie cutter. It evolves with every single situation. And the board was really clear. They said, Julie, don't be worried about losing your job. If this thing goes south, we knew it was a pilot. We're going to test stuff out. And that was part of what became clear in the recasting process when you do it, is you're going to take leaps. You're going to try new things with the full understanding that they may fail, and that's okay. You're going to use that information to go forward. So we told everyone it was a pilot. We didn't pretend that we had all the answers, and we absolutely still don't. We took evaluation very seriously, because when you are trying new things, we found that you really do need to critique yourself. We actually paid someone to do a professional evaluation. It didn't all work out great. We call it falling forward. We fell fast, we learned from it, we moved on, we tweaked it, and what eventually became the recasting of building assets process that was used in the Diocese of Iowa. And I'll give you now just kind of a brief overview exactly what that is. It's not a magic bullet. What it is a process of helping you figure out within your context what's the best way to reach financial self-sustainability and a thriving church with the assets that you have. You can go to the next one. So there are 4 goals. Financial self-sustainability, you have to be able to afford yourself so you can be there to help others. And using this wonderful building you may have, if it's empty, there is opportunity there. We got well over the idea that you should only use buildings for social service. You can use it to make money and use that money to support yourself and then do mission. The second goal is to be relevant to the community. One of the questions we ask is, if your building were to disappear tomorrow and your congregation were to blow away, would anyone other than the members really notice or care? Does your neighborhood feel any relevance of your parish and its community in their lives? And so a lot of the work that's in the process is finding out what are the things that keep people up at night in your neighborhood, and where are the places in their life that need to have connection, and finding a way to use that building to connect to those people. Sometimes in worship, sometimes in faith-based, sometimes it won't be, but it may be bringing them through the doors to at least where you bring value to their lives. The third was, now it was selling the building or reusing the asset if you find at the end of the process that you really can't afford to maintain it and your best use is to let someone else have it. We would help you go through that process of selling the building, finding a different use for it, dispersing of the assets legally and compassionately. And the fourth goal, inspiring a new way to be a thriving church, because we know it's not all about buildings, and we know he didn't die for buildings. And if it's not all about mission, then what's the point? So at the end of the day, we're hoping that by going through this process, new life is generated back into the parish. The way the process works is over a course of about a year, we meet with a group of parishes, and it's a group generally because we find that a group, you get a lot of brains in the room working on the solutions, and you hold each other accountable. So about 4 times we'll come in and go through a process of finding out what your niche is, finding out what your assets are, and you come up with the solution that best fits with the number of people you have, your budget, your community, and what starts to create the fire in your belly. Next. We're going to hear exactly how that process fans out. So I'm going to end with one of my really bad jokes. I'm known around the office for telling really bad jokes. So 2 frogs are sitting on a log. One of them decides to jump. So now how many frogs are on the log? That's right, 2, because deciding ain't jumping. You can go to the next one. In my experience, that when I walk towards life, life starts to walk towards me. And I never have to walk the whole way alone. What I've often found is that the things that come towards me are totally unexpected. I didn't even know to ask for them. But what I do know is I always had to make the first move and say, I'm going to go do a new thing. And I'm pleased to turn it over to Iowa, which did do a new thing.
We have 61 churches, and our diocese is the whole state of Iowa. So our churches are kind of spread out, some geographic distance between them. We have only one church that does not own a building, and that was our newest church start that never intends to own a building. Our membership has declined 30% over the last 10 years. We're pretty much following the track of the whole Episcopal Church. Our worship attendance has declined about 25% in the last 10 years. We're now down to about 3,000 Episcopalians in Iowa worshiping on any given Sunday in an Episcopal church. We are a diocese of small churches. We only have 6 churches with membership of over 200. Over half of our churches have less than 100 members. Our ASA is, 90% of our average attendance on Sunday is under 100. 40% of our Sunday attendance is under 25. 2/3 of our churches have endowments, so now you know why we still exist. But half of those churches, so 1/3 of the churches in our diocese, have reduced their endowments 40 to 100% in the last 10 years. So we're on the same path as the Episcopal Church in decline. And as I said the other night, we are in the desert. For many of our small congregations, their buildings are now defining them and not the other way around. When looking at their budgets, their building maintenance is one of the largest chunks of their pie chart. Staying in their building and keeping their door open is now their mission. In the past 10 years, we have merged 2 churches and closed 3. And just a little over a month ago, we were informed that now a 4th church has held its last service on Palm Sunday. So even the Bishop Sutton this morning has given me hope that maybe we can go back and resurrect something out of this small congregation. Iowa has been developing and using a lot of different ways of congregational support for the last 10 years. Our bishop is now celebrating his 10th anniversary this month, so 10 years is a big thing right now. So we know this is going on, but the precipitating event that made us pick up the phone and call the Episcopal Church Building Fund was back in 2010. Our bishop had lunch in a restaurant that was a former Episcopal church. And there was a pizza oven sitting where the altar had used to be. And he came back and talked a lot about this experience. He was just filled with very conflicting emotions, but kept going, why? why couldn't we have done something creative with that building? Why did it have to turn into a restaurant? So we picked up the phone and called Episcopal Church Building Fund. We had heard about the recasting pilot that took place in Western Pennsylvania, and we said, we want to be next. We're ready. We held an initial meeting in December of 2010, and it was a snowy December day, and a third of our diocese showed up with representation. So we knew we were on the right track. We had a lot of interest in what they were offering. And from that, we had 4 congregations that actually applied. We did our recasting on a voluntary basis. The churches self-identified that they were ready to do this hard work. So what do you need to do this? Well, looking back, I think that a congregation and the diocese needs to be experiencing some pain, some discomfort, and definitely fear. There's a sense that the countdown clock is ticking, that you can hear the tick-tock, tick-tock, and knowing that time is running out. You're now on the final run. You also need permission. We get stuck in doing things a certain way, and we think it's the way to do it, and we don't know that we have permission to do it another way. It's very important that your bishop or other leadership, either in the diocese or in your parish, know and agree that you can use your building for something besides worship. You need resources. You can't be so far circling the drain that you no longer have enough resources, resources to turn the ship. It takes people that want a different future. I liked what was talked about this morning about talking about what God is doing in your life, that God is moving in each of our lives. We do have a future, and we do have a responsibility to carry that message. It takes a team. Sally talked about, we don't want to work with one individual. We need a team. And I say it needs to be a team of the stakeholders in your congregation. You've got to get people on board because you're talking about moving to a new place. You need congregational involvement and you need leadership. And it's not going to be just the clergy leading the charge on this one. Can you do this by yourself? Well, if you're not too far gone, maybe. You can do pieces of this and revitalize different ministries. But when you're already slipping down that slope, we've not been telling ourselves the truth for a long time. And what's going to change that? It usually takes someone from the outside to point out what's obvious, but to help us see it. We need to be able to see the whole picture. No one in an individual church has the whole picture of what their parish is. The treasurer holds pieces of it, your senior warden holds pieces of it, every member holds pieces of it. And it's not until you come together with all those pieces and start telling the truth that you really know your current situation. You need a big picture. Oftentimes when a church is slipping like this, they think they're the only ones and they kind of hunker down and are trying to put on a good smiley face. There can be comfort in knowing that you're not the only one, but this is beyond that. We don't want you to be comfortable. The ECBF has truly frightening facts about the Episcopal Church, that we're not the only ones, and the church has to wake up and wake up fast and do something. The other thing is motivation and butt kicking that the Episcopal Church Building Fund does. It's really hard to kick your own butt. And they do it really well. But they also do it with encouragement and caring. All the time you're getting your butt kicked, you know that they're doing it out of love for you, because you need to move to a better place. And the other thing that we get stuck in is the analysis paralysis. We can talk endlessly about the problem. And that's part of the butt kicking, is get us out of talking about it and start doing something about it. Take that first step. Do that first project. So where are we at in Iowa? Well, we had 4 meetings with Julie and Sally, and many, many phone conferences and web conferences with them. They met individually with teams. We met corporately in person, and we still have periodic check-ins. For the churches in Iowa, this became very clear early on that this was not a project. This was not something a team of people in a congregation was going to be doing in the church. This was a process, a paradigm shift for the church. It is moving to a new place. It also is a long-term process. There's a sense in which obviously it's never done. Change only stops when we die. And also through this process that other things get revealed about ourselves, and sometimes we had to stop and take a little detour and then get back on track and keep moving. So where are we at? Well, we don't have, quite honestly, a lot of the really hard measurable results. But what we do have is definitely changed attitudes. The fear and discouragement that they expressed in our first meeting, by the third meeting, there was great hopefulness, a new hope, a belief that they can do this, a belief that there was something worth doing this for. The inertia that they had had of just continuing to go along has been changed to empowerment. And they are now facing and claiming their own futures. No one's arrived. I would say right now they're in places of temporary stability. They've stopped the flow. They've stopped the bleeding in some cases, most of the cases. They know they can't stay where they're at right now. They need to keep pushing. And for a couple of them, they have... but it gives them right now a little space to work on their next steps. A couple of them are still facing some really hard decisions. Budget-wise, they've all improved their financial solvency. They haven't reached true solvency. One of them has. The other 2 probably are not there yet. They all have projects that are contributing to their income. Everything from producing and selling products, renting office space to other nonprofit organizations, to even having another church nest within their facility. They've cleaned up their buildings. They've taken a hard look at what the community sees when they look at them. They've cleaned up their exteriors. They've done repairs. One of the churches that had been saving, they had filled rooms with stuff over the years, cleaned up, cleaned out, and has now reclaimed several spaces that are now available for rent in the community. Small conference spaces, small meeting rooms. They've all increased their visibility and involvement in their communities and are a little better at looking at themselves through the eyes of their communities. In a recent check-in phone call, one of the priests noted that it's now easier for someone from the outside to come in. Thank you.
Hi. Why so heavy?
My statistics.
Bad news? Did you hear some bad news recently in the last few days? Where are you? I wonder if there's a spectrum somewhere between what you call it, temporary stability and like absolute free fall. I wonder if any of us find ourselves somewhere on that scale. I would say we're not really at St. Thomas, my church. We're not really at temporary stability. We're not at absolute free fall, but that has to do. We could be at absolute free fall, but for the fact that we have been through this process. Okay, so we are in a place where we're able to catch our breath right now. And that has been the absolute godsend that has allowed this much richer conversation about the future. Not the imagined future, which is based on the imagined past, but an actual future that lies ahead of us, that God is working with us to create. I give my left arm for that. So there's a lot of chatter right now within the church about what's working and what isn't. I just call it anxiety, and it's gone from sort of low-grade anxiety to something more. And we all have our little aphorisms about how we should deal with it, and we all have our theological justifications for how it should all be dealt with, and so on. I think a lot of this anxiety should simply be set aside because it isn't serving us. It's useless. In fact, it's giving the church this ulcer that it's currently suffering from. But you've heard it before and you'll hear it again. There is no magic bullet to do this. There is only blood, sweat, and tears. There are smarter ways to bleed, sweat, and cry. So you don't have to bleed, sweat, and cry so much. And this turns out to be one of them, because it takes us to a positive place. My parish is in a decaying neighborhood. It's in the highest crime precinct of Sioux City. It is bounded on one side by an old prostitution ring, and on another side by the city's oldest drug ring. The sanctuary is totally sublime, absolutely transcendent, a really thin place. It regularly seats 70 to 90 people, and it was built in the heyday of civic public religion on the top of the hill, above the Catholic cathedral. It had to be built above. They say, let's go to the next hill. And they called it the snobs on the knob for a long time. So for a long time, it was like, well, yes, we have 70 people, but we can seat well more than that. Okay, that's great. we're glad for you about that. We have a parish house that confers the administrative function, the food pantry, the Sunday school, all the kind of the regular stuff. My office is in there. My office is really just a place to hold the books that I don't read anymore because I have a computer now. And then, of course, like meeting spaces and things like that. And the food pantry is served by a community garden that we bought on a quarter acre just to the south of the parish house. We have a big parking lot that we're trying to interest people and come and park in because it is adjacent to various services that would be advantageous. We have a well-used rectory. I have 2 small children, and but 85% of the property goes unused 85% of the time in the total physical plant. I see heads nodding. Is this a familiar story? Now think about what you're doing with that with what is not 15%. Okay, you're heating it, you're cleaning it, you're insuring it, you're maintaining it. You're having whole properties, committees of people to look after it. And that's not just bad stewardship, it's just not good sense. And we have an endowment. We have less endowment now, about 60% less than when I started. I put my foot down a couple of annual meetings ago, and I said, I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but we're going to deal with this year. That was January, and it wasn't but a few weeks before or after that we had sent a delegation to learn about the recasting program. So my chief concern in this was the endowment, because to me, the endowment represented the capacity for this parish to sustain itself. It wasn't that they couldn't run out of endowment and then sit around and ask themselves, how are we going to continue? It's simply that the mindset was, we've always had this thing. So we have to stabilize that so that we can kind of have functional interest in other areas and not be so distracted by it. Which, what I'm telling you is that I was distracted by it too. So I wanted something that would kind of help us get to the bottom of it. So two moments from this process stand out for me. The first was that we were in Charles City in this hot basement, and we were crammed into this place. And our treasurer was giving, because of the assignments that you get in recasting are very specific. If you take the questions at face value and you do the hard work that is implied in going out and getting the information to deal with the issues that they get to, you will deal with the issues that are in front of you, okay? Pay attention, do the work, and you'll get to where you need to go, okay? So we had kind of done that. We didn't like the discomfort that the place that they took us to. So our treasurer was kind of standing up and he was saying, well, you know, we have this endowment and it's great, and but you know, we all know we can't live on it forever. And somebody said, well, what do you mean by that? And Riley said very honestly that he thought maybe something like 5 to 7 years, but he wasn't really sure. And took that to heart, went back to the hotel room that night, did some figuring, came back the next day, and he said, it looks like we have 3 years left. And everybody's hair went whoop. The reason I don't have any hair for this conference, I have less than when I started, though. And it's grayer than when I started. But the reason I have less is because of that day when it went whew. And what he said was, at which time we will have to make major operational decisions. But we all know that's treasurer speak for 3 years and you're screwed. So that was the announcement that everybody needed to hear, at least at St. Thomas. And we came back with this information and had not really had a chance to present it. We're trying to figure out what to do with it, you know, when you get a piece of shocking news. So the next day, Sunday, one of our members, who's a prominent local business person and owns a bookstore and a travel agency, which are in one store, by the way, was just sitting in the pew thinking, boy, it'd be fun to do kind of a fundraiser for the church. And she thought, oh, I wonder if we have any cool candy recipes laying around anywhere. And then she hit on the idea of toffee. And so she asked Nina, our matriarch, do we want to just stop and sing? I was at a conference one time, and I was smart enough to go to the panel where they had the Elvis impersonator. Because I realized if I go to any other room, I'm going to be completely annoyed. So I'll just go hear the Elvis live. It was great. It was in Vegas. So Chris says, candy. So she approaches Nina and she says, do you have a good recipe for toffee? And Nina says, yeah. She says, there was one in our church cookbook a few years ago. Feast of Goodness. So Chris goes and she gets Feast of Goodness, and there's a recipe submitted by Hazel, who had died in 2006 and left this toffee recipe. Well, we take it in and we tweak it and we start looking at it, and I don't know that everyone in the church completely understood at that point why we were so interested in getting the best possible product, you know. But Sunday after Sunday for about a month, you get like, pick A or B, A or B. Okay, now B or C. And we went through this pretty scientific selection process, and they realized we can do this. We have power over this situation. So what became the idea for a very small fundraiser for something specific within the church, like for Sunday school, became no, we need to stop the hemorrhaging in the general operations budget. So that money went into general operations. So the first year was $9,600, and last year was about 10 or 11. So this year we're on track to make the projection from the plan is about 22.5, which is nowhere near the budget problem. But they got the message. We can take, we already have accountability for these issues when they come down to us. Now we can actually take responsibility for doing something about them. So it's very powerful, and it was a God thing, and it was not a magic bullet. It was a God thing. Okay. The other moment, and I think probably the most significant moment for me personally, was when the story was told at one of these sessions that about a parish that figured out that it had about 2 years left in its resources before it would kind of run out of money and have to close, merge, divest, foreclose, let the bank have it, whatever. And the priest, funny enough, had a couple of years. How many?
3.
Oh, 3? Okay. Not years, but how many minutes do I have left on my presentation? How many years on my presentation? 3, okay. So it was all this time certain business. And somewhere, someone convinced someone else that it was all divine timing. This is God's will. So when Father so-and-so retires, let's just close up shop. And I know, that just sat so wrong and so sad with me. And I said, well, whatever else happens with me, I'm gonna do my part, and my part is to not allow that kind of mythology to spread and infect this congregation. Because if they died for a priest and his family who could go anywhere else, you know, just how grotesque would that be? God has a mission for them in this place and time. Now, there was a high premium placed on telling the truth. And probably for about 6 months, I unpacked the Johannine theology that you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. This was my job in this process from the pulpit. The next piece that comes along with that is, it is the Spirit who will come, whom I will send, who will liberate you. So the truth and the Spirit coming go hand in hand. So that's how I saw it, at least. The Spirit is alive in this place because we're telling the truth to each other. And it was hard. I mean, it's like looking under a rock and seeing something you don't want and just kind of putting it back down again. But after a while, we got to the place where we really could deal with it as a vestry and as a congregation and as a recasting team. The main thing that we gave up in that truth-telling process was that false pride of being the Tony church on the hill, you know, the bees knees. We realized that we weren't that anymore, that we were another congregation in town, and that was really pretty wonderful, because this other thing never was true, really, to begin with. I don't know if that resonates with you, but it shook me to my core, actually. The main thing that we received is a much clearer, much more resolved picture of ourselves. And in addition to Toffee, because of the realization about the financial picture, we have been doing lots of stuff about inviting people in to see our space, to use our space, to try our space. Groups that we hope eventually would yield up, you know, some passive income. When your average person in the pew is 70 years old, maybe they don't have a lot of energy to go out and do a whole bunch of things. But Toffee is, you can stand there and you can do the one, you know, your one job of making toffee. So it's not ended nearly. And we have actually stopped using the word recasting because the idea is that it's a program, and we're not doing the program anymore, we're just living into this reality. So this has completely changed the way I think about ministry. It really has. I have done a 180 on the whole thing. And if it ever was about maintenance, it certainly isn't now. It's about truth-telling and being prepared to take control of the future and to make with God the future that is being prepared for us and to take our place in it.